Welcome, welcome, welcome. Beyond Emissions podcast at the Beyond Emissions YouTube channel. Like our video, subscribe, and hit that reminder bell in the corner so that you can be a part of this very important conversation, this ongoing conversation about living in a world that is beyond emissions. And, I was brainstorming, for the name of the program. Beyond Emissions is what we came up with, and I think we're spot on with that. It's exactly how we should be thinking about this whole process. There's other terminologies out there: zero emissions, emissions-free future. It all means the same thing. But when I said the words out loud, beyond emissions, it got me to start imagining a future of what the heck does that look like? What does it look like to live in a world beyond emissions? Nikola Tesla's dream, talked about in a special news break that we did at the Beyond Emissions YouTube channel. Go check it out right now, that video where I read a great article from Interesting Engineering, and New Atlas had some great articles, and one of them being a special barge using wave energy and like a blowhole, pushing a valve up and down, space-based solar, and then Nikola Tesla's dream. I guess Caltech is working on it, which is pretty cool. His dream, of course, of transmitting energy wirelessly around the world using satellites, just like we, send data all across the world. Same exact concept. So you could overproduce renewable energy in one part of the earth when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And if it's in abundance, you're not losing value. You can just send it across the earth where it's dark via these satellites and back and forth, sharing energy and creating a whole lot of supply, which of course will bring energy costs down, make energy abundant, darn near unlimited, with all of the geopolitical problems in the world where people are fighting over what? Resources. For what? Mostly energy. And so the best way to really encapsulate this program is we're not just about the environment, although beyond emissions, the first thing I think of is that dirty sky. I think of the environment. I think of climate change being mitigated and maybe even being turned backwards, like it was when we all got locked into our houses during COVID and there were no cars on the road, and the environment was cleaner and the birds were singing. It was weird and creepy and awesome at the same time. So yes, the environment's part of it, but also national security. How is national and economics? How are national security and economics tied to all of this in the dream of beyond emissions? Well, part of the discussion is that, the geopolitical issues in the world, mining after all of these different minerals and different, chemistries that we create with, lithium, for example. We don't have it all dialed in as far as, it pertains to recycling all this lithium. Most of the recycling is done just by giving it a second life in another application. And anyway, long story short, those natural resources are generally part of the causes of a lot of wars, and we could eliminate that. So there's a whole area of discussion around the idea and dream that we have here at the Beyond Emissions YouTube channel. Like and subscribe, folks, and be a part of the ongoing conversation with us of what it's going to be like to live in a world beyond emissions. My good friend and colleague, partner in crime in this mission of living in a world beyond emissions, I know he has the same passion as I do for this subject, so I had to get him on the program. Especially, I'll have people on that focus on, one little customer and one little system and one little solar panel system at a time, because whether it's just a little grain of sand or a whole beach, you're still going towards that same goal. So small or large, the effort is worthwhile. But this friend of mine, Hanan Fishman from ALENCON Systems, he'll be on with us in just a moment. He's working on large projects out there that can make big changes, and working with companies that have new technologies that are going to help us get there. So I'm excited to invite him on the program right now. My good friend, Hanan Fishman, welcome to Beyond Emissions YouTube channel podcast, and also as well, welcome to the world. We're living the dream right now. It hasn't happened yet, but we believe it can happen living in a world beyond emissions. Welcome, Hanan.
Hey, Josh, thanks so much for having me. As always, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you have the same passion, don't you? Beyond emissions, what does a world look like beyond emissions to you, Hanan?
Well, it's a great question, Josh, and you believe it or not, you kind of touched on it. You touched on a lot of things in your opening, but you touched on one thing. You alluded to Nikola Tesla, and I don't want to get too corny, but I guess I can't help it sometimes. I think the world beyond emissions is really, quite frankly, a DC coupled world. And if we go back to that whole Tesla Edison debate, AC versus DC, the reality is we know how that ended up. Obviously, AC won out because at the end of the day, AC was a superior method for distributing power at distance when we had centralized sort of fossil fuel powered, coal and natural gas powered plants. But if you dig a little deeper into that little debate, it's actually sort of a back to the future kind of debate, because really what Edison was looking to do really was build a whole bunch of microgrids, because his vision was to put generators in the basement of buildings in New York City. And so the whole thing has kind of come full circle these days, where with two major sort of paradigms, and the two paradigms are this from back in those days. Is paradigm one is, of course, the sort of arms of new power generation, the real muscles, if you will, are DC sources and loads. And by that I mean, of course, solar being the biggest, of course, fuel cells, and then of course we've got battery energy storage, which is both a load and a source, right? And then we've got EVs, which are of course effectively just mobile batteries, and there's obviously plenty of people would argue that they can both be a source as well as a load. We don't need to get into that debate for today, but the point is that these are all DC sources and loads, and these are really the lion's share of our new generation resources. At the same time, there's very much a trend toward much more distributed generation of these resources rather than centralized locations. And of course, one of the words for that can be microgrid, but really just generally distributed generation. And so I think for me, this sort of post-emissions world that you're talking about is a much more heavily DC coupled world. And I think, granted, I have a little bit of a certain shade to my glasses, if you will, but that's kind of how I see things.
Right. And Jeremy Cordray, friend of the show, came on episode 1. I asked him that question and he said, efficient. The world is going to be more efficient beyond emissions. Efficiency is what the world's going to look like. And that's what he said. DC, if the power source is right close to you, you're not really losing anything, right? So efficiency no longer becomes a problem in that DC world.
Well, it certainly, efficiency is always a problem, but it's definitely, if we want to really get futuristic, and I was just talking at a high level, but when we think about really getting, and again, maybe that's what this podcast is about, is really getting futuristic.
It is.
Think about, and you think about efficiency for a second. Think about how much power is lost in those little stupid bricks that we carry around with our laptops. And it used to be just our laptops, right? But now it seems like every damn thing's got a little power supply attached to it, right? And what is that thing? It's just a rectifier, right? It's taking AC from the wall outlet and converting it to DC to run your appliance. Right, whether that's a laptop, whether that's your adjustable bed, your Craftmatic adjustable bed, or I guess these days it's a Sleep Number bed, whatever it may be, right? And think about how many of those bricks, and pick up one of those bricks sometimes. They're hot. They're inefficient. They burn a lot of heat. That's a lot of wasted energy, right? Now think about a server, a data center, right? So when you think about the opportunities, for efficiency, to the point that your other guest made, yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not even letting myself go there, but let's go there for a second, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I could imagine these bricks, these batteries, these rectifiers, whatever they might be, where you're losing good 15, 20% from the wall to your device, to the application, at least. you're losing that much. So claiming that we are now living in some efficient world would actually be a total fantasy. The reality that you just described, that we all, all the way down to the Craftmatic bed, right? Like literally, I grab those bricks and they are hot. And that right there is lost energy. And if you could make up that difference and just go DC to DC right away and not have to rectify it, that could make a huge difference. Good point, Hanan.
So yeah, like I say, I view the world through a decidedly DC coupled lens, I guess you might say.
Right. And you mentioned electric vehicles. Your company has a solution, DC to DC converters and optimizers. And, one of the things that you mentioned in a white paper previously, and I have to bring it up again, because you're leading the way there before anyone else is talking about it. My friend Hanan Fishman from ALENCON Systems, over in Pennsylvania, right, I believe, Philadelphia.
Right.
USA made too. Very cool. You were talking about it before I heard, like 6 months later, maybe I saw some articles discussing the importance of having these islands of EV chargers that are all DC power stations, basically, and DC to DC, because all of the batteries that are in the electrical vehicles are all, direct current. They're all DC. And so you were talking about the importance of not overtaxing the infrastructure that can't handle this growth in electrical vehicles right now. How could we get there sooner? Talk a little bit about your solution from ALENCON Systems and that white paper pertaining to what I just described.
Well, yeah, so, really here at ALENCON, we really view EV charging as a very, very big challenge for the current distribution grid. And so we really look at how we're going to create the gas station of the future, right? Yes, EVs are on the rise, but obviously you can't compare the number of charging stations you see to the number of gas stations you see. And so what we really believe is the gas station of the future, if you think about the gas station of the present, right? It's basically, there's a big tank underground full of gas. A big truck comes by every so often to fill it up, and, the cars come in and fill up as needed. And so what's kind of interesting about most EV charging these days is most EV charging, is done directly coupled to the grid. So when you go to a fast charging situation, wanting to charge your car quickly, just as quickly as you can fill it up at a gas station, what that equates to is a very big current draw. So if we start putting that kind of current draw on our grid, we're going to have a really big problem. And so our view of the world is create the gas station of the future with battery energy storage as your tank rather than, that big traditional fuel tank. Charge up that tank, say at night, at some reasonable level of current when power is much more abundant, particularly if there's, say, wind farms near there, where, of course, wind power is much more prevailing in the evening. And then during the day, have those vehicles pull up to that gas station of the future and charge with almost no taxation on the grid, which will greatly ease demand charges, of course, as well as the grid infrastructure cost of getting ready to charge electric vehicles at scale.
Yeah, electrification of everything is happening. It's something that's coming. Period. End of story. And just like in the beginning of the internal combustion engine. They used to have to take a mechanic with them. The drivers used to actually have to take a mechanic with them. Nowadays we have AAA or whatever, and we just call and get it towed to a shop. Back then, in the very beginning, it was so inefficient and unreliable versus the horse and buggy in the very beginning that a mechanic had to actually physically accompany you with all of his tools just to make sure when you broke down, not if you broke down, the vehicle could get fixed and you could get, well on your way. So back then, in the very beginning, there were challenges. It wasn't ready right away. But did that mean that we abandoned our dream of a future where Americans could drive and go anywhere they wanted to? No, right? Hanan, talk about that. Just because it's not ready doesn't mean you can't start the dream right now, right?
I don't know that it isn't ready. It's just a case of, transitions are tough, right? And that's what we need to do. And like anything else, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So the sooner we start, the sooner we finish.
And new technologies are out there right now. The science exists right now. We don't have to wait for 20, 30 years from now or a grant to be given by the federal government. These technologies exist right now. I'm looking at some amazing technologies pertaining to creating microgrids using hydrogen energy storage and fuel cells. And, a great way to not tax that grid is to take advantage of some of these technologies that exist today. What are some of the technologies that you think can get us to a world beyond emissions that we possibly even have at our fingertips today, Hanan?
Well, you just said it, right? I mean, to me, it's the combination of hydrogen and other fuel cells, not just hydrogen. Hydrogen isn't the only fuel that's out there, but it's obviously a big one. It's obviously battery energy storage, and it's solar. I mean, to me, those are the three things. And then, of course, there's loads of others. And, I kind of look at it like, there's when it comes to this, I think the exact means, again, and when I say means, I mean the chemistry, right? I'm not going to get into, is it lithium ion? Is it vanadium redux? Is it, one of the other sort of, shall we say, left of center chemistries that we see being developed? It's not my job to pick the winners and losers because, there's just so many tremendously talented people working on many different solutions. And again, it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not like lithium ion's going to win and everyone else is going to lose, or vanadium's going to win and everyone else is going to lose. There's plenty of room for loads of winners. But the point is, and then I think the other thing you want to also throw in is the opposite, which is hydrogen production, right? As a fuel. Knowing that hydrogen is a fuel that we can now make basically from water through the process of electrolysis, right? Again, another DC-driven process, right? So you can imagine having kind of like we have these Bitcoin mining operations. You can imagine having loads of just hydrogen making operations, right? Where we've got loads of solar panels out in the middle of nowhere doing nothing but making fuel all day, and having tanker trucks drive away taking that fuel and dispatching it to where it needs to go. So yeah, that's what I see.
Oh, you nailed it. Cummins engine, big in the world of diesel. They have pivoted big time. Just announced the other day that they're going to create one of the largest electrolyzer plants in the United States to do exactly that. And, that's one of the things that we can really look at hydrogen, for example, as a fuel source, not just for using fuel cells in electricity production, but also as well, there are ways to transition diesel engines to run on hydrogen. I'm not going to go into all of the hows. There are ways to do this to help make the transition for our truckers and our truck drivers. Could you imagine living in a world where truck drivers didn't exist? No, right, Hanan? It's impossible. They require so much power to be able to do what they do, bringing us, our food, our clothing, our goods and services all around the world. We need that transportation continuing on, and we can't afford to have a bunch of truck drivers be put out of business. That would just do so much damage to our economy, our supply chains, everything, right? Prices, inflation, you think it's bad now. We need truckers on the road. And that is a great bridge, using hydrogen as a fuel source. And now that it's so abundant, being able to utilize renewable energy and electrolyzers to create just a massive amount at low costs. Now we have something that can maybe mitigate some of our inflationary pressures as it pertains to fuel cost and our reliance on fossil fuels, but not sacrificing the power. Talk a little bit about that. I love that you brought it up.
Well, I think one of the great challenges we have, and I don't want to get political or anything like that, but I think one of the challenges we have from a resource perspective, particularly here in the U.S., is we don't value water appropriately, right? Water's too cheap. right? And we waste too much of it as a consequence. Now, you guys out there in California are probably much more sensitive than we are here on the East Coast. We don't get those dictates from, the local municipality, turn off the water. It's quite probably the way you guys do. But, the reality is that, this is an issue and we need to all be more sensitive to. And if we're monetizing water more, by turning it into energy, we're going to put a real value on it, right? And I think that by itself can start to help by, just by having us all realize the monetary value of water and, quite frankly, being more parsimonious with it.
Yeah. And fuel cells. What is the exhaust in a fuel cell? Heat, electricity, or what comes out of a fuel cell? Heat, electricity, and H2O. Now I know you're not getting the same amount of H2O out of the tailpipe as you are what went through the electrolyzer. I know that isn't equal. I'm curious. I'm not an expert in it, so I am curious to know what that difference is. How much water do you get out of that process versus putting back in? Because then you just recycle it back in so that you can mitigate some of those, water issues. But I mean, there's lots of ways that this could be done. I think they're really pushing the envelope, if you will, or envelope, however you want to tomato, over in Australia. They're doing a great job of trying to get their transmission lines down and everything, creating more microgrids using hydrogen over there. And one of the ideas that came about in being really efficient with your water, because like he said, as we have less water and we have more people, our resources are dwindling, and then we start using it to produce energy. Now there's a real cost associated with it, and the economics of the whole thing change. So we have to start thinking about water differently. Well, one way that we could mitigate that issue is to not use water from our drinking sources to create electricity or hydrogen with. Instead, we could go to wastewater treatment plants, I'm thinking, around the country and talk them into cleaning up their water like they do right now. And they sell it, for other markets. I'm not saying we're not taking that out of the supply chain, but it just makes more sense to go after that. Wastewater's maybe been recycled. Now there's a value to that community for creating power. And I mean, this can actually create a value that doesn't cost communities, but can actually put money in the pockets of communities, right? I mean, just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we could do this. We could do this from a efficient standpoint as well. What is the greatest example that you can think of in your mind right now that just, you're like me, you have a passion for this subject? Beyond Emissions YouTube channel, Hanan Fishman, my good friend from ALENCON Systems, is with us. And he shares the same passion we do here, living in a world beyond emissions. How do we get there? What is the greatest example in your mind right now that you've seen with some of the companies that you're working with? I mean, what you're allowed to talk about. I know you are working on some projects that you have to...
That you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the problem, is how much I can and can't talk about, because it's super frustrating, actually, because, if I could talk about literally 5% of what we do, it would be amazing. But literally, but let's just leave it at a lot of the themes that I've been touching on. This combination of hydrogen and batteries on a common DC bus, a combination of solar and batteries in a common DC bus is really at the heart of basically everything we do. There's one particular project I'm just literally, I would love to talk about it right now. I'm literally just waiting for permission from my customer to start to talk about it, but you would love it. And but yeah. So yeah, sorry to be so evasive, but it's yeah. If only I could, in very specific terms. I was very encouraged to actually see the other day we're doing a microgrid project for the Southern Company, which is quite frankly pretty typical of the kinds of projects we do. That was nominated for some sort of year, which is pretty cool. But
what was it? The phone.
Just the exciting thing is
the phone cut out. What was it nominated for, Hanan?
it was basically a microgrid project of the year with the Southern company, which was pretty exciting. That was good to see. It was a DC coupled solar and storage project we were doing with LG Chem batteries and the like. But Josh, I actually do have to dash here. Speaking of making a post emissions world, one of the challenges of building that world is your calendar gets filled up with lots of calls you got to jump to on a daily basis.
Hey, I appreciate you joining us, man. I appreciate it. Well, let's wrap it up then, and I'll continue the discussion. And as soon as this is ready to post at Beyond Emissions YouTube channel, I'll make sure I shoot you the link so you could share it and check it out. In the meantime, for our listeners who are interested in exploring DC to DC optimizers, converters, and of course, DC coupled solutions made in the USA from ALENCON Systems. Hanan, remind our listeners how they can contact you.
Oh yeah, you can hit us. Best place to hit our website, which is www.alenconssystems.com.
Excellent. And you can also find Hanan Fishman at LinkedIn, where he produces a lot of great white papers throughout the year. Hanan, thank you for taking your valuable time with us today at Beyond Emissions. I really appreciate it.
Josh, thank you as always for the opportunity. All the best.
Thanks. Have a great day. Hanan Fishman, my good friend from ALENCON Systems. What a great guest to have on the program. That's what it's all about. Living in a world beyond emissions. What does that world look like to you? Now, I know that we are, inundated with, everything becoming political nowadays. But frankly, this is something that does not have to be a political subject. This does not need to be a political subject. It helps the environment. That helps us all. It helps the economy. How does it help the economy, Josh? It helps the economy by decreasing the overall cost of energy. Believe it or not, everyone's after the holy grail of unlimited free energy. That's why everyone's pouring cajillions of dollars into nuclear fusion. That's why everyone's looking at space-based solar, using the waves, mounting wind power generators out in the middle of the ocean where you can get unlimited supply. Space-based solar, so many different technologies. Hydrogen fuel cell microgrids, so many different technologies. Why is it that everyone's going after these different versions of the electricity holy grail, the clean energy holy grail? Is it just because of climate change? No. Of course, that's a big part of it. We all acknowledge you cannot take fossil fuels out of the ground and millions of barrels a day, not a year, but a day, burn it, have the exhaust of all of that carbon go up into the atmosphere, and just little bit by little bit over a century have it not add up and cause issues for our overall environment. It's impossible. Okay, this isn't a political issue. That's just science. That's just a reality. Now, does it mean that it is as consequential as a big giant volcano or some of the other natural events that have shot just as much up into the atmosphere, throughout the many generations and thousands of years and millions of years of the existence of the Earth prior to the internal combustion engine? And yet we're still here. Yeah, exactly. In other words, there is a discussion there for the fact that it's not just in one camp. And if you're in the other camp, you're a climate denier. But at the same time, if you don't acknowledge science to say that we are having something to do, humanity is having an impact on the environment, whether you want to agree with that or not. It's a fact. The problem is that it's been made political. There is money and grants given to scientists that just go with one side of the story so that you end up having just only one side of the story told. At the end of the day, there are technologies out there, though, that can allow us to have all the same amount of power. We're not talking about everybody gets a Prius. We're not talking about everybody has to start riding their bicycles like in China. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a world that we love. getting in the car and having just as much power in your vehicle and just as much range, fueling stations or energy stations, microgrid stations, for example, using the microgrid solutions from ALENCON systems that Hanan Fishman just described. These new technologies, microgrids powered by hydrogen fuel cells, etc., so that you're not taxing our infrastructure that is not ready for it yet. We can start doing this now. And we can do it without sacrificing our freedom, without sacrificing economics, without taxing our businesses and our citizenry into the ground, without printing more money than we have. We already have a problem with that already with inflation. Okay, in my opinion, going towards a world of beyond emissions is actually a way to mitigate those problems and issues, especially as it pertains to inflation. Because if we can create a world where energy is virtually unlimited and in huge supply, and it's cheap, and we're not reliant. I'll go there in a second as well. We talked about that on the last episode with Callie and John. A Beyond Emissions YouTube channel. Josh Brum, your host. Beyond Emissions YouTube channel. Like this video. Subscribe to our channel. Make sure you hit that reminder bell up in the corner. Be a part of the conversation. If you'd like to email me, beyondemissions@gmail.com. So we can get there. And what does that world look like? It's not just the environment. It's not just climate change. There are economic benefits as well, because once energy becomes clean energy, becomes totally abundant and everywhere, and there's more than enough to hand out to everyone, the supply and demand reality of economics starts to come into play. And we're no longer relying on cartels in Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, and people that hate us, Iran. We're no longer relying on a market out there that is antiquated, if you will. That doesn't mean I'm demonizing oil. I'm very thankful that we grew up in a world that had an engine and an internal combustion engine that had the power that we needed to drive our economies into this new century. I'm glad that it existed, the technologies that came out of it. In chemistry too, not even just in power. It's amazing. So very thankful. But at the same time, like Maya Angelou always said, when you know better, you do better. And we can do better. Again, not just for the environment. This is multifaceted, if you will. It's not just solely looking at the environment. We're not a one-trick pony as it pertains to living in a world beyond emissions. The world that is beyond emissions is going to be helping us be more self-reliant as a country, not relying on enemies of America to make sure that we have right standing in the world economically, because we're totally reliant on them for fossil fuels. Not exhausting all of our own natural resources. Who knows? We might need it someday. It's just keep it in the bank, man. Keep it in the bank. But the reality is that we don't have to be beholden to these dictators around the world. So we're talking national security. We're talking economics, supply and demand, and we're talking about the environment. Every single way you look at it, this is going to be a better world to live in. And I for one, I don't want to live in a world anymore right now where that's just something I'm interested in. I have a kid. I hope to have, grandkids someday. And I want them to live in a world that is beyond emissions. What does that look like? Could you imagine going outside and breathing clean air because there are no emissions going up in the air? But our economy wouldn't even notice the difference. Our economy would be booming and growing. Imagine you get your electricity bill, or imagine instead of having a utility, oh my gosh, there you go. That's a good discussion. Imagine going to your mailbox and opening it up and seeing, up in Alaska, they do this actually. Citizens of Alaska actually get a dividend check from the energy company, utilities and the energy producers up there, oil companies. They actually get a check every year as citizens of Alaska, a dividend check. Could you imagine energy is so abundant and so cheap that it's your local community that's producing it, or you yourself in your own house or your own business, or a microgrid that's being created and ran by your municipality, your actual city or town. Just imagine that. It changes the game. And don't get me wrong, I know there's disruption. I can imagine the utility not liking to hear this, but I'm sure the phone company, I grew up when I was a kid, I remember the rotary phone where you had to sit there and just turn the dial. It'd turn and click. And then, of course, we had the phone on the wall with the cord that just got all, bungled up and everything. And we'd have it real long so you could stretch it out. But it was right up there on the wall. And, didn't even have call waiting when I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember that. And now I got my cell phone here. I look for, the area where I would have a phone on the wall, and there is no phone on the wall anymore. Do you have a phone on your wall anymore? No. I'm sure that pissed the phone company off when that happened, but it's a reality. Steve Jobs came along with Apple and disrupted the whole entire, market and created the iPhone. And then, of course, a lot of Android and a lot of other players, Samsung came along, and now everybody has a phone in their pocket. Like Dick Tracy, right? Or get smart phone in the shoe. That was just all science fiction back then, or the communicator, captain's log. Beam us up, Scotty. No, this is like happening right now. We don't have phones on the wall anymore. We don't have that antiquated technology anymore. And the utilities could become just relegated to being a backup to our, other systems. As opposed to being the primary source of your power. What are you doing right now? I always say this when we have a discussion about whether you want to rent a house or you want to buy a house, right? What happens when you rent a home? And nothing against if you've got to rent a home. I've had to rent a home as well, but we're just talking about the economics of it. What happens when you rent a home? When you rent a home, you're shelling out money to that landlord every month to live there. And then what happens? Are you getting any equity, any value? No, you're living there, you're burning your money up, and then you're staying one more month. That's it. But you never own anything. As a matter of fact, you owe something the next month, and so on and so on. Same thing with your utility. What are you doing with the power that we're currently buying from the utility? You burn it up and use it, and they take your money every single month. What do you get for it? You get higher rates. You don't get anything extra for it because you're renting your power instead of buying your power, instead of owning your power is a better way of saying it. And that's what we want. We want energy ownership in this country. And I mentioned Alaska. Could you imagine that your city, for example, let's say you live in a city and the city council gets together and decides to set up these microgrids around the community with fuel cell powered hydrogen, fuel cell powered energy storage and renewable energy systems. And now you produce so much energy that you're able to sell it back out onto the grid of whatever the community has in excess. And maybe there's just a little small sales tax for everyone in the community that pays for it. And in a sense, you have a form of darn near free electricity for everyone. But it's so abundant that you're not worried about the cost rising. It's a locked in rate. It's easier to, plan out your business and your cost of doing business with your energy cost, for example. Imagine there's excess energy being produced so much so that you actually, as a citizen of your town, actually get a dividend like they do up in Alaska. Just imagine that. Imagine the utility is no longer just selling you the energy that you burn up, you rent, and get nothing for it other than just getting to use it for that month. Imagine creating your own microgrid in your community or your home. Have your own power plant. Have your own system at your house built so that you can use renewable energy 100% of your total usage and not have to rely on the utility at all. You would then own your energy and you would not have to pay the utility anything. And if you consider that you might be living another 40, 50, 60 years in that home or that community, just game plan that out for how much cost will continue to rise with inflation, et cetera, and energy cost from a monopoly. That's another thing, monopolistic forces with the utilities. They're going to make sure that they maintain that power. They're going to go to the Public Utilities Commission, and they're going to make sure that they maintain that power over you, so that you have to continue, you have no other choices. You have to continue to rent your power from them and be an energy slave. And wouldn't you rather be an energy owner? Wouldn't you rather own and produce your own energy and be a part of this solution? See, it's not just the environment. It's about freedom. It's about economic stability and economic growth that can happen utilizing clean energy, abundant energy, and energy that you own, not energy that you're renting. That's what happens when you buy it from the utility. It's absolutely amazing, the subjects that we're going to be discussing here. Thank you for joining us. Our guest, today's program, Hanan Fishman from ALENCON Systems. Really glad to have him on the program, and looking forward to many more great episodes with you. Thank you for joining us in this dream. And we hope that you continue to listen right here, like our video, Beyond Emissions YouTube channel, and subscribe to our channel and hit that reminder button so you could be a part of the ongoing conversation of what it's going to be like to live in a world beyond emissions. God bless. Have a great day.